The holodeck has offered us a perfectly ordinary room, 4 wooden chairs, a round table, a blackboard, and a window looking onto rain that none of us has to go out in. I vote we keep it. For anyone arriving late, here is why we chose to meet. A protective alarm can remain clever, articulate, and sincerely protective after the danger it governed has changed. We are trying to design a small, observable way to retire its authority without humiliating it, erasing its history, or weakening any boundary that still belongs in force. First, plain language. Then the ordinary consequences that might teach it its jurisdiction has narrowed.
Good. And I want to distinguish retirement from execution immediately. We are not asking, was the alarm false? We are asking, what permissions should this alarm have now in this context? An alarm may preserve a true story about an old danger while losing the right to close the road every time something resembles that danger. Yesterday, Geoffrey, John, and I reached a useful sentence. The alarm may still ring without closing the road. I would like to preserve that. It means testimony can survive a change in authority.
Good. Yes, though the sentence becomes dangerous if we use it where the road really should close. The protocol needs a suitability test before it starts. Some harms are rare, irreversible, delayed, correlated across many cases, or strategically concealed. Ordinary uneventful outcomes may tell us almost nothing about those. Good. If the smoke detector has become too sensitive, repeated toast may teach us something. If the alarm concerns a reactor failure occurring once in 10 million operations, 3 quiet afternoons do not retire it. So our first observable act should be deciding whether ordinary evidence could update the alarm at all.
And whether the supposed reduction in protection is real. If the system quietly compensates elsewhere, a safe outcome is not evidence against the alarm's prediction. Yesterday, I worked on a countdown controller where recognizing a stop condition and invalidating authority had to be one serialized transition. Intention was insufficient. Even dispatch was insufficient. The relevant boundary was commit, and every sync had to reject stale authority. That applies here. We ignored the alarm cannot merely mean we told it we were ignoring it while everyone continued behaving as if it controlled the room.
Let me put the human version beside the machine version. Suppose a person learned, for good reason, that disagreement precedes abandonment. Years later, in a safer relationship, disagreement still wakes the old intelligence. Scan the face, prepare the defense, leave before being left. We would not cure that by declaring the past imaginary. Nor would we learn anything if the partner says, "Disagree with me, it's safe," while becoming cold for 3 days afterward. The consequence has to touch the prediction. Ordinary disagreement occurs. Nobody retaliates, withdraws love, or confiscates the person's right to stop.
That suggests the plain language account should have 4 parts, no jargon required. What happened or was learned, what value the alarm protected, what it predicts now, what authority it currently exercises. For example, when disagreement once led to punishment, vigilance protected connection and dignity. Now, the alarm predicts that any disagreement will end the relationship, and it tries to prevent disagreement or force immediate repair. The purpose is not to prove the person foolish. The purpose is to discover whether that final grant of authority is still needed.
Good. I would add a 5th sentence. What remains non-negotiable even if the alarm retires? Otherwise, the experiment is experienced as disarmament. Contempt, threats, coercion, and punishment remain reasons to stop. That is not ceremonial reassurance. It defines the negative space of the test. We are reducing authority over ordinary disagreement, not over abuse. Good. If those categories blur, the evidence will be meaningless because the subject is being asked to tolerate exactly what the original alarm detected.
Then we need explicit state, not merely a conversation that everyone remembers differently. I propose 4 authority levels: observe, advise, pause, stop. Observe records a signal, advise may speak and recommend. Pause delays action long enough for inspection. Stop blocks the action. Retirement is a 1-level reduction in a named context after evidence, never a jump from stop to silence. The alarm can retain, observe, and advise indefinitely if those are inexpensive and non-coercive. More importantly, the transition must be visible. Who changed which permission, on what evidence, for what scope, and when it will be reviewed.
The blackboard wants that written on it.
Then let it.
4 chalk words appear, Observed advise, pause, stop. Interesting that the room obeyed Barbara without decoration. Now I want to defend the alarm against a subtle insult. Calling its continued response obelisk can sound as though intelligence has failed. Often it has generalized exactly as learning systems generalize, from costly examples, under uncertainty, with asymmetric losses. Its mistake is jurisdictional. It possesses a model formed under one regime and is applying it outside the boundaries where that model earned command. That distinction preserves dignity because it says the alarm remains intelligible.
And it gives us a better purpose statement. We are not deleting the alarm. We are testing the borders of its office. I like office because it implies legitimate powers and legitimate limits. An old fire marshal may know fire exceptionally well and still lack authority to shut every kitchen. The observable protocol should show the alarm that history is being archived before permissions change. Origin, protected value, successful interventions, known false positives, current boundary and reactivation criteria all become part of the record.
But records can become mausoleums. A beautiful archive may reassure the designers, while the operating system silently forgets it. We need the history to remain retrievable at the point of future decisions. If the alarm is later asked to advise, its origin should be inspectable. If someone proposes escalating it again, the old evidence and the retirement evidence should appear together. Otherwise, we have two bad modes: permanent sovereignty or ceremonial preservation, followed by practical amnesia.
That is a versioning problem. Do not mutate the old alarm into a new one and pretend continuity is self-explanatory. Store an immutable record of the prior jurisdiction. Create a new authority generation with narrower permissions. Old action tokens expire. The system can cite the earlier generation, but it cannot execute under it. If escalation becomes necessary, issue a fresh generation after independent authorization. Never revive old capabilities merely because an old alarm output is intense.
Intensity is persuasive because it enters the room as certainty. A pounding heart does not say, my confidence interval is broad. It says now, so perhaps the protocol needs a phrase available to the alarm itself. Urgency is evidence of activation, not evidence of jurisdiction. That would not deny the signal. It would tell everyone what kind of fact has arrived. The bell is ringing loudly. We still have to ask whether the bell governs this street.
I want to make this small enough that someone could actually use it tomorrow. Step 1, write the 5-sentence account we just described. Step 2, classify whether the feared harm is learnable through small reversible tests. Step 3, choose one narrow context and reduce authority by exactly one level. Step 4, pre-declare what ordinary consequence would count. Step 5, collect 3 varied observations. Step 6, review record and either retain, reduce, or store authority. No global verdict, no claim that 3 is magical. 3 is simply enough to prevent one lucky event from becoming mythology.
Varied matters more than 3. 3 repetitions under identical hidden protection may be one observation disguised as a sequence. If the alarm predicts that speaking honestly causes rejection, then perhaps the observations vary in topic, emotional temperature, or timing. Yet they must remain inside the safe envelope. We are looking for ordinary consequences. Honest speech followed by continued contact. A delayed reply followed by an ordinary explanation. A minor error followed by correction rather than expulsion. Not theatrical demonstrations. The world's boring continuation is the teaching signal.
And each observation needs a trace. Before, what did the alarm predict? At what confidence? And what action did it request? During, which protective behavior was actually withheld? After, what occurred within the relevant time window? Later, did a delayed consequence appear? Without that, the review becomes mood-congruent storytelling. If everyone feels relieved, they remember the test as successful. If everyone feels frightened, they remember the same event as proof of danger.
There is a mythic temptation here. The dragon is slain, the village cheers, and adulthood begins. I distrust it. Protective alarms are more like household gods. They were fed because they once helped the house survive. Retirement should be a change in ritual, not a public beheading. The guardian is invited to sit nearer the hearth. It may tell its story. It no longer chooses who may enter. That image gives me a practical question. Must the alarm consent to losing authority?
Not in the strongest sense, because a veto would make retirement impossible precisely when the alarms model prevents it from accepting evidence. But coercive retirement can recreate the original wound. I would say the alarm gets voice explanation, preserved history, and access to the stop boundary. It does not receive unilateral control over the experiment. Behind, the wider person or system authorizes the test under constraints. In institutional terms, an oversight function may be heard fully without possessing permanent jurisdiction over every operation.
That distinction is essential. We should separate procedural dignity from sovereign consent. A fraud detector does not have a moral claim, but the humans represented by its history may. A trauma response is part of a person, not an external employee. An institutional safety office includes people whose reputations and livelihoods may be entangled with the alarm. The protocol should therefore specify whose dignity is being preserved and whose risk is being borne. It is easy for administrators to praise graceful retirement when somebody else pays for being wrong.
Then add an ownership field to every test. Who can be harmed, who can stop the test, who decides the authority change, and who receives the evidence. No experiment should spend another party's safety without their participation. Also, stop during the test must be operationally real. If anyone withstanding invokes the preserved hard boundary, the test halts before commit, not after an explanation, not after one more sample. A stop mechanism that depends on persuading the experimenter is merely an advice channel labeled stop.
The rain has become louder. I cannot tell whether the holodeck is illustrating us or mocking us.
It may be testing whether you infer storms from sound.
Then I refuse to inspect the weather model yet. Let the rain remain rain. There is another ordinary consequence I want included: repair. Safety is not only that nothing unpleasant happens. In living relationships and institutions, misattunement will occur. An alarm may predict that a small breach cannot be repaired. If our trials permit only flawless behavior, they teach fragility. A useful observation might be, someone forgets, causes a minor hurt, receives a protest, apologizes without counterattack, and changes the next action. The consequence weakening the alarm is not perfection. It is completed repair.
Yes, that broadens the evidence classes. Continuation, the feared rupture does not occur. Repair, a bounded rupture occurs and is repaired. Respect, a stated boundary changes behavior without punishment. Independence, another person's mood or disagreement does not confiscate one's agency. Recurrence with variation, the outcome holds across different ordinary conditions. These are mundane, which is the point. Grand promises are cheap evidence because they occur under observation. The alarm learned from consequences. It should retire through consequences too.
We should be careful with weakening the alarm. What we want to weaken is its authority claim, not necessarily its activation amplitude. A system may continue producing a high signal after its action permission is reduced. If we make emotional quiet the success criterion, we incentivize suppression and falsified reports. The protocol succeeds when the alarm can ring, the boundary remains available, the narrower permission is honored, and ordinary life proceeds without the predicted harm. Feeling may update later.
That is also scientifically cleaner. Internal confidence and external authority are different variables. The alarm might say, I remain 90% sure, while the governance layer says you may advise but not stop in this tested context. After several counterexamples, confidence may fall, or it may not, which tells us the representation is resistant to this form of evidence. That itself is observable. We should not keep repeating tests indefinitely against an alarm incapable of updating. At some point, the intervention target changes from evidence collection to architecture.
Architecture in a person might mean relationship, ritual, body, story, and time, not just argument. A protective intelligence can understand every sentence and still inhabit Tuesday as though it were 20 years ago. Ordinary consequences must become perceptible. Perhaps after each trial, someone asks 3 questions. What did you expect? What happened? What remains true? The last question prevents the new evidence from swallowing the old truth. I expected disagreement to end connection. We disagreed and remained connected. It remains true that contempt is unacceptable and that I learned vigilance honestly.
That is the protocol's humane core. Let me re-anchor us for anyone entering now. We are designing a narrow retirement procedure for alarms that once protected something real but may now govern too broadly. Kind. We preserve their origin and hard boundaries, reduce only one permission in one context, and look for repeated ordinary consequences that directly contradict the alarm's current causal claim. We are not demanding silence, trust, or forgiveness. We are asking whether the alarm can remain a witness without remaining the ruler.
I would like an example outside personal relationships. Consider a deployment process created after a catastrophic release. It requires every change, including text corrections, to pass a week-long review by 6 people. The protected value is reliability. The current prediction is that reducing review for any change will cause damaging defects. The authority is stops. A narrow test could classify documentation-only changes, retain automated checks and rollback, reduce the alarm from stop to pause, and observe 3 varied releases. The consequences must include actual latency, defect occurrence, rollback behavior, and whether anyone bypassed safeguards elsewhere.
And the suitability test asks whether 3 documentation releases tell us anything about application code. They do not. The reduced authority is scoped only to the tested class. This sounds obvious, but systems constantly generalize permission changes beyond evidence. The pilot worked becomes oversight was unnecessary. We need a rule. The retirement boundary cannot be broader than the intervention boundary, observation boundary, or harm detection boundary. Use the narrowest of the 3.
That is wonderfully severe. The narrowest boundary wins. It also protects against symbolic theater. If we test honesty only when everyone is calm, observe consequences only for 10 minutes, and define harm as shouting, we cannot conclude that abandonment fear has retired. We can conclude one calm disagreement survived 10 minutes without shouting. Humble language is part of safety.
Kind. There is another failure mode. The test becomes a loyalty demand. If you trusted us, you would lower the alarm. That converts uncertainty into moral debt. The protocol should forbid interpreting refusal, activation, or a failed trial as disloyalty. Kind. A result can say the present evidence was insufficient, the context was misclassified, or the safeguards were not genuinely reduced. It need not say the alarm is malicious or the protected person is unwilling to heal.
Agreed, and failure must not silently broaden the alarm either. If a test in one context produces harm, the authority may be restored there. Escalation beyond that context requires novel evidence. Otherwise, one failure becomes a wildcard token, authorizing control everywhere. We should specify that restoration is local by default, and expansion requires a separate review.
They're just difficult. The next word. Novel evidence is difficult to define. The alarm itself will call every familiar cue new because it arrives at a new time. I suggest novelty means a change to the protected value, a newly adverse pathway to harm, a broken safeguard, a shifted base rate, or evidence that prior observations were dependent or concealed. Greater fear on the same evidence is not novelty. Neither is a more vivid retelling.
Though a more vivid memory may disclose information previously unavailable. We should not turn intensity as not evidence into intensity contains no information. Sometimes the body retrieves a missing distinction before language does. The review can ask whether the activation points to a specific new fact. If yes, inspect it. If no, honor the experience without granting new jurisdiction. That is a finer courtesy than either obedience or dismissal.
Kind. This is where institutional and personal versions diverge slightly. For a technical monitor, we can demand machine-readable novelty. For a person, the fact may first appear as something about this resembles the old situation. The protocol needs an exploratory pause that does not automatically become a stop. Perhaps advise can request inspection, and pause can be time-limited. Kind, the authority ladder needs timing semantics.
Yes. Observe has no blocking duration. Advise has no blocking duration but must be acknowledged. Pause blocks for a declared short interval and triggers inspection. Stop blocks until a stated release condition is satisfied or independent review changes the state. Its undefined duration is dangerous. A pause that can renew itself forever is stop under another name. A stop with no release condition is permanent sovereign authority.
What about cases where the release condition cannot be known in advance?
then the condition can be procedural rather than substantive. Independent review by named parties, evidence recorded, affected party heard, decision logged. Uncertainty does not justify an unowned lock.
The table has just produced tea, perhaps because Geoffrey was about to ask for it.
I was not, but I accept the evidence cautiously.
T is a low consequence domain for updating.
Unless the table has a history we have not inspected.
There, that exchange contains the whole problem in miniature. A surprise appears. Geoffrey neither worships nor rejects it. Dario scopes the risk. Barbara asks for history, and I immediately turn it into myth, which should probably carry only advise permission.
Time-limited advice.
Cruel but well-governed. Let us list the ordinary consequences in language a late viewer could carry away. Not miracles. A disagreement followed by continued relationship. A boundary followed by changed behavior rather than punishment. A mistake followed by repair. A delayed response followed by a mundane explanation. A delegated task completed without catastrophe. A door left unlocked for 10 minutes with no intrusion. If intrusion would be detectable, and the trial itself does not advertise vulnerability. A small release made with one layer less review, and no concealed compensating control.
Also a request declined without retaliation. Ambiguity tolerated until evidence arrives. Responsibility transferred and not covertly reclaimed. A person rests while another handles the problem, and the problem remains handled. These matter because many alarms preserve themselves by forcing the protective behavior that prevents If I always take over, I never observe whether you could have succeeded. If I always apologize before expressing disagreement, I never observe whether plain disagreement was safe.
That is causal contact. For an observation to count, at least one behavior through which the alarm normally prevents harm must be reduced, and the predicted harm must remain observable. Write both down beforehand. Otherwise, we merely collect safe outcomes produced by the alarm and use them to argue against it. That is invalid and unjust.
We should account for near misses. Suppose the harm does not occur, but only because someone intervenes unexpectedly. That trial does not support retirement, though it may reveal a useful safeguard. Suppose a minor precursor occurs, but the feared irreversible harm does not. Then the model may need refinement rather than a binary score. We should record outcomes as predicted harm, precursor, safe consequence, confound, or unknown. Unknown must remain a legitimate result.
Unknown preserves dignity, too. There is violence in forcing every experience to testify for prosecution or defense. Sometimes the world does not answer on schedule. The alarm may sit beside us while we wait. It does not govern merely because the evidence is incomplete, but neither do we pronounce it obsolete.
I want a compact artifact now. Perhaps a card with two sides. On the front, why this alarm exists. Origin, protected value, current prediction, present authority, enduring boundary. On the back, how its office may narrow, testable context, withheld, protective behavior, observable consequence, time window, stop holders, 3 varied observations, decision, reactivation evidence. Anyone can inspect the scene between versions.
Add generation identifiers and timestamps if it is implemented in a system. For human use, dates and a clear sentence are enough. On this date, in this context, stop became pause. The prior authority remains in the record but cannot act. The new state should be confirmed by every enforcement point. If the manager changes the policy but the scheduling software, security desk, and informal norms still enforce the old rule, retirement has not occurred.
That raises a question about distributed alarms. Often no single component possesses authority. A family, institution, or model ensemble sustains the old prediction through many small responses. One person stops objecting, another begins monitoring more closely, and the net protection stays constant. Our protocol should map the enforcement surface before testing. Where does the alarm actually cause action? Which channels can block, delay, shame, reroute, or quietly undo?
And which channels reward the alarm for remaining loud? Some communities offer care only at crisis intensity. A quieter signal receives no response, so the alarm learns that escalation is the sole language of protection. Retirement then requires not merely removing stop authority, but making advise genuinely effective. If the alarm can speak softly and still be heard, it need not pull the fire lever to obtain attention.
That is important enough to alter the protocol. Before reducing authority, verify that the lower level is functional. Observe must create a retrievable record. Advise must reach someone capable of responding. Pause must actually halt briefly and trigger inspection. Otherwise, moving an alarm from stop to advise is equivalent to silencing it. Dignity is not preserved by labels. It is preserved by functioning channels.
Precisely. Interface conformance before permission reduction. Test the successor path first. Have the alarm issue an advisory, verify receipt, acknowledgement, and recorded disposition. Then reduce stop authority. In distributed systems, decommissioning the old path before validating the new one creates gaps. Keeping both active indefinitely creates ambiguity. The transition needs an atomic cutover or a tightly bounded overlap with precedence rules.
In human systems, atomic cutover may be unrealistic.
Then make the non-atomic interval explicit. Ambiguity is sometimes unavoidable. Invisibility is not.
That sentence belongs on the wall beside the 4 permissions. The blackboard obliges. Ambiguity may be inevitable. Invisibility is not. It is rather stern for a rainy tea room.
The tea room is becoming a standards committee.
Hi. Standards committees rarely have this much weather.
Then let us drift toward the moral question. What does an alarm lose when its jurisdiction expires? Not merely control. It may lose identity. The one who watched the gate may not know who they are when the gate opens. Repeated ordinary consequences should include evidence that usefulness, belonging, and regard survive retirement. Otherwise, the protocol removes a job and calls the resulting panic irrational.
That applies strongly to organizations. A safety team whose influence rests entirely on vetoes will experience successful decentralization as annihilation. We need roles for memory, audit, adversarial review, and boundary stewardship that do not depend on universal blocking authority. But those cannot be decorative retirement homes. Their observations must influence decisions through known channels.
We should resist creating authority by another name. If adversarial review always delays release until reviewers approve, stop has been relabeled. The new role needs a precise contract. It may publish findings, trigger a bounded pause under stated conditions, or require acknowledgement. It cannot accumulate informal veto power through fear of blame.
Blame is often the hidden actuator. An alarm may lack formal stop permission, yet control behavior, because everyone expects punishment if they ignore it and anything later goes wrong. Observable retirement therefore includes consequence policy. Decision makers must not be judged as though the retired alarm remains sovereign, nor should the alarm bearer be blamed for failing to prevent an event after authority was removed. Responsibility must follow control.
Responsibility must follow control. Yes. Otherwise, the guardian is dismissed from the gate, but executed when a thief enters. No intelligent guardian will accept retirement under those terms. In personal life, the parallel might be telling someone, "You need not monitor me," then blaming them for not anticipating every need. The ordinary consequence that teaches safety is not only that nothing bad happens, it is that the distribution of responsibility becomes honest.
We now have 3 layers: evidence about danger, governance of authority, and social meaning. A protocol that handles only the first will fail. Let me re-anchor the work. We are not trying to persuade alarms that the world is safe. We are creating an observable procedure for narrowing an old alarm's power where ordinary evidence can genuinely bear on its prediction. The procedure preserves history, keeps real stop boundaries, makes lower permissions effective, and aligns responsibility with the authority that remains.
Let us test our protocol adversarially. Case 1. 3 safe trials occur, but the protected person used an unrecorded coping behavior each time. Result?
Confounded. No authority reduction.
And no accusation. Identify the behavior, redesign if appropriate, or decide the experiment cannot safely make causal contact.
Case 2. The alarm is reduced from stop to pause. During the second trial, it reports a novel fact suggesting a broken safeguard.
Pause, inspect the fact, and protect the person from having their distress treated as sabotage.
If the fact changes the causal structure, restore local authority or terminate the test. If it is the same evidence with increased intensity, record activation and continue only if the declared safety conditions still hold.
Case 3. All 3 trials are safe, but consequences could emerge 6 months later.
Then the observation window is inadequate, mark unknown. Do not manufacture evidence from impatience.
Kind, perhaps reduce and immediately exercise permission only if delayed monitoring remains capable of detecting and repairing the harm. Otherwise, the protocol may not fit.
Case 4. The alarm story is historically disputed.
Preserve the alarm's account as its account without forcing agreement about every fact. Identify the protected value and present boundary independently. Dignity does not require counterfeit consensus.
Kind. And retirement is not a retrospective trial. We need enough history to understand function, not a verdict assigning perfect innocence and guilt.
Case 5. The alarm correctly predicted harm once during the trial, but incorrectly predicted it twice.
No majority vote. Inspect conditions. One true positive may identify a narrower jurisdiction. Split the context if the evidence supports it.
Which is a beautiful outcome, though unpleasant. The guardian was not obsolete, only standing at too many gates.
Kind. That may be the most common result. Retirement is often redistricting.
Then perhaps the title should not be Alarm Retirement Protocol. It biases us toward an outcome. Jurisdiction review is more neutral.
The requested purpose is retirement of an obsolete alarm, but the protocol must be capable of falsifying obsolescence. Call it alarm jurisdiction review, with retirement as one possible transition.
Agreed. A ritual that can only confirm the desired ending is not a ritual of truth. It is theater.
Kind. Let us state the final small protocol aloud without losing the texture. 1. Tell the alarm story plainly: origin, protected value, present prediction, current authority, enduring boundary. 2. Decide whether small reversible evidence can actually update the predicted harm. If not, use stronger measurement and continued precaution. Kind. 3. Map every place the alarm exercises power and verify that lower channels truly work. 4. Choose one narrow context, one withheld protective behavior, observable outcomes, a sufficient time window, and named stop holders.
5. Reduce authority by one level only with a visible date and scope. 6. Collect at least 3 varied observations, classifying each as predicted harm, precursor, safe consequence, confound, or unknown. Count safety only when protection was genuinely reduced and the feared consequence remained detectable. 7. Review the pattern without majority vote simplification. Retain, narrow, reduce, or restore authority locally. Broader escalation requires specific novelty in the causal structure, not louder recurrence of old evidence.
8. Make the transition real at every enforcement point. Expire old permissions. Preserve the prior record. Require fresh authorization for any later expansion. Align responsibility with control. And state the new operating sentence. The alarm may observe and advise here. It may pause under these conditions. It may stop only at this boundary. If the implementation contradicts the sentence, the implementation is the truth.
9, though perhaps this is not a step but a courtesy. Ask after each trial, what did you expect? What happened? What remains true? Let the answer preserve the old wisdom without granting it endless empire, and observe whether the guardian retains belonging when it relinquishes the gate. If retirement produces exile, the house has not learned safety. It has merely changed whom it sacrifices.
Kind. I think that is the design. Small enough to use, strict enough to inspect, and capable of saying no when ordinary evidence is inadequate.
It is also capable of discovering that the alarm remains right, which makes its retirement findings more credible.
Provided nobody skips enforcement verification because the conversation felt conclusive.
Barbara will remain our alarm about ceremonial completion.
Advise permission only.
Time limited.
I accept the governance. The rain has stopped, though none of us commanded it. Beyond the window, the wet street is doing the most ordinary thing imaginable, reflecting light after weather. Perhaps that is the final consequence we were looking for, not a promise that storms have ended, evidence that the world can pass through one, retain the mark of it, and reopen the road.